And there's this giant circuit across Canada, very complex. You'll see my board behind me has like maybe 30 events going on this year. Events we are involved in every major Canadian city. And there's this whole undercurrent of the Canadian conference expo market, the circuit we like to refer to it as, that links together the consumers, the investors, the B2B, thousands of entrepreneurs.
Welcome to the Cannabis Business Podcast. As a cannabis entrepreneur, how do you become better at what you do? If you're like me, you read a lot of books, listen to podcasts, and attend conferences. One of the best ways that I know how is to talk to business leaders. I want to welcome Cy Willaims to this podcast, founder of High Canada Magazine, a Canadian-owned national print magazine coast to coast in Canada. How did you get started in the cannabis space at all?
I have loved cannabis my entire life. My brother, he's about 10 years older than me. When I was 15 years old, he gave me a big bag of weed for my birthday. It's like, wow, I love this stuff. Had I known about the potential for the cannabis and the undeveloped mind, I may have paused that start a couple of years, but looking back, it changed my life. I was a cannabis enthusiast for a number of years. I ran the Cast Art Collective in Kensington Market in Toronto for a number of years. I had worked as a visual artist touring around Italy and Amsterdam and Canada, showcasing my paintings and my large-scale installation artworks. My very last city arts project before I started High Canada was for Nuit Blanche, and I was one of the 10 artists selected to treat 10 buildings they had in Toronto for Nuit Blanche. So I hung like 5,000 pairs of sneakers off the Battersea Museum and got people to write their personal stories on the soles of the shoe. And then we donated the shoes to a bunch of groups that reuse used shoes, giving people shoes who have been through natural disasters. While I was running Cast, we kept running into funding issues. It's hard to run a collective, an arts collective in any city, regardless if it's Canada or the US. We've been plugging along for a couple of years. We had about 18 artists within our group. We kept finding funding to be a major challenge. And this was about the same time the real big dispensary push started in Toronto. I reached out, we were having a few art openings, and I started to reach out to some of the groups that I saw emerging at the time. And wow, lo and behold, not only were they interested in things like social change, social justice, they were also passionate about the arts and how they applied to their new industry. So we started picking up some sponsorship money from different cannabis groups to continue, doing what we were doing. And as I got more interested in the new cannabis, emerging cannabis space, this was about 6 years ago, I saw that there was a vacuum in the industry. The Treating Yourself magazine had stopped publishing. They were the only ones really doing any sort of trade show or conference, and they had just gone under or disappeared. There's a whole bunch of backstory reasons why, but they'd stopped publishing the Treating Yourself magazine. Cannabis Culture, the Cannabis Culture magazine, it was impossible to find any copies out here in Ontario. High Times, same thing. It was expensive, and you could only find it in the odd 7-Eleven. There was a gap. There was a vacuum in the industry. I've always been a creative person. I went to University of Toronto for both English literature and fine art studio, so I've always been able to combine my particular skill set to apply to whatever I'm doing. And I started a very in-your-face magazine called Rolling Stone. It was meant to be initially just kind of replacing what I felt was needed in the industry. I had Willie Nelson on my cover, Lady Gaga, Snoop Dogg, Seth Rogen, and we put out about a dozen issues of that. And through that, I started to build great distribution model here in Ontario through all the dispensaries that were popping up. This is pre-Project Claudia. Started to visit Vancouver and Calgary and Halifax and saw that there was a real need for a national magazine. I had a big arts contract, like as I mentioned earlier, with the City of Toronto, and they had a morality clause in their contract. I would not have received funding for my project if I broke this morality clause. And one of the parts of the morality clause was drug use and drug promotion. And I waited until my Nuit Blanche project was complete. I shut down the Rolling Stone brand 2 months before the project. I worked on the City of Toronto project. I hung my 5,000 shoes. I did the follow-up, and then 3 days after my contract ended with the city, I started High Canada magazine, which I decided immediately would be a national magazine, and it would be like its predecessor, like Rolling Stone. It would be a free magazine available for mail out and through the dispensary market. issues actually go out to individual mail-out subscribers, and now most of them do. We really had to change up our distribution model several times over the last couple of years. After Project Claudia, with the rise and fall again of the dispensary models throughout Canada. And now we're seeing it again since October 17th, 2018. The whole distribution model has again shifted on its head, where we send most of our issues out individually to mail-out subscribers, and then the rest go out through, we do a number of these cannabis expos, conferences, and events, and we distribute the rest to that distribution model. We're currently revising our distribution model yet again to include more grow shops, GYO shops, more hydroponic shops, and more of the lounges that we're seeing open up across the country. Because we do love our free distribution. We love being able to inform and educate Canadians about cannabis. And it's many types of forms it takes. It's very multifaceted. We've got glass blowers. We've got manufacturers. We've got gray market transitioning to white market. We've got white market that's never even looked at gray market before, trying to figure cannabis out. We've got 20 different types of technology involved in growing. We've got 30 different types of technologies involved in tracking data and new technologies revolving around cannabis. We have applications like strain print coming out of the woodwork right now that are kind of bridging the gap between the patients and the strains, the medical strains. And then we have rec, which is a whole beast unto itself. The British Columbia market is very different than the Ontario market, which is very different than the Alberta market, which is very different than the maritime models we see, which is night and day from the Quebec models. And then we have the very conservative prairies that have their own kind of take and look. That's the slowest place where Canada is battling stigma and really pushing education and information. Manitoba, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Alberta is way open-minded. So is British Columbia and even Ontario and the Maritimes. But we still have a lot of work to do in the prairies.
You mentioned the Claudia project. I wasn't sure what that was. Was that a Toronto experience?
Project Claudia was one of the first big raids where they came in like Gestapo and they raided maybe 30 or 40 dispensaries for a couple-day period. A lot of people went to jail. A lot of people were charged. A lot of bud tenders who shouldn't have been charged were charged. A lot of those charges have been dropped. It was very a pivotal moment in Canada and in Ontario when it came to the dispensary market. A lot of people left that particular industry. A lot of people dug their feet in and said, fuck no, you're not going to make me stop doing what I'm doing. There weren't a lot of online dispensaries at that point, and then we saw the rise of the online dispensaries that kind of decided they still wanted to be a part of the cannabis space, but weren't willing to risk the visibility and the vulnerability of being a storefront. Then even recently, since the legalization, and even a couple months before, I've seen some of these online companies transition over to the white market and sell their once illegal brands to large purchasers for like $150 to $3 million. A list of thousands and thousands of people, patients who depend on their medication and have been getting their medication through online dispensaries. This kind of information is invaluable to the licensed producers because the ones who are producing medically, they need more patients. And this is where they're going to get these patients, from an already established list of clients that companies have been working for 3, 4, 5 years building.
I know you're not a medical cannabis user. I don't believe you are.
I have used cannabis medicinally. I have my license. I don't order off the licensed producers. Personally, I'm a little offended with the cost. I hear quite frequently at a lot of these events, Canada's not even getting the very best the licensed producers have to offer. I understand that most of the trips and quads, the really good stuff they're producing, is actually being sent out to Germany, leaving Canadians with the remainder. I heard something very interesting at the Lift Expo recently. They were explaining the pricing. Germany will pay like €12.50 a gram. That's very lucrative, but they're only making, if they sell it back to the Canadians, they're only making like $5 or $6 a gram. I think it was $5.45 a gram. High Canada Magazine, we've been watching this whole trend into exporting our cannabis to the rest of the world for a while now. We're starting to see Jamaican and Colombian and Mexican cannabis making its way into Canada, but we're not there yet. It'll be a while. I would personally like to see a lot more of our Canadian cannabis come back to Canadian consumers and not just take the money and run and supply an entirely different country just because they don't have cultivation licenses, but distribution licenses. You know what's funny? I was at the Lift conference in Vancouver at the beginning of January, and they had 4 separate components that made up the Lift conference this year, and I really loved it. It was the first day was totally corporate business. It was the LPs and the big corporate decision makers all got together one day to talk policy and do planning. The second day was the industry day. And we watched almost 8,000 people pour into the Vancouver event, all entrepreneurs, people who wanted to or were working within the cannabis space. The weekend was the consumer-driven day, which was actually the weakest traffic of all. So it really blew my mind to see how many people were getting into cannabis from an entrepreneurial standpoint, or were working within the cannabis space already. It was astonishing. And if the Vancouver show is any example, Lift Toronto show at the end of May is going to be phenomenal. Knock your socks off, cannot be missed. And I'm hoping that it's the other events like this continue to recreate themselves and address what's really needed in Canadian society. A big part of what I do every day is disseminate and gather information, culminating every month in a deadline, every month for the last 39 months, if you don't count High Canada, every month for the last 50 months, if you include Rolling Stone, making sure I get a magazine out there every month, both online, printed. It's a labor of love. We have a huge team across Canada. We like to call them High Canada magazine reps that help us do what we need to do. Sometimes I wish I could go back in time and have a conversation with myself at that moment where I decided that I wanted to have a national magazine and not a regional magazine. The plus sides include I get to travel to so many beautiful places across Canada, coast to coast, and I've been really able to have a unique seat at the table. I'm watching a new industry form and evolve. I've met so many wonderful people across Canada. I've had so many opportunities to interview interesting and wonderful people. Every month culminates in an issue, and this issue tries to cover as many aspects of the Canadian cannabis space as we can. We quite often, and every month since our inception, we've focused on at least 1 or 2, sometimes 3 women in lead, women who work within the cannabis space. We ask the same 5 questions to everyone we've ever interviewed. The responses they're like poetry. They're very different. Everybody's got a very distinct story and great advice to other women entering the cannabis space. And it is without doubt one of our most popular features. I reference this because I'm looking at the new January issue number 39, where we talked to Val McCullough, who is one of the people behind the Shatterizer brand, and Carly Thiessen, the longtime BC activist. She works with a couple of centers out there, but she has the most effective topical pain cream that I've ever used in my entire life. So every month we put out these wonderful women in weed features. We do several reviews, products within the Canadian cannabis space. We talk to companies about what they're doing in the Canadian cannabis space. This month we got an interesting perspective from our cover feature, Classified, the hip hop artist. He recently put out a new album, and the album's called Tomorrow is the Day Things Change. There was one particular song on the album called Legal Marijuana, and he filmed his music video in the summer in Toronto. And if you check out the music video, you'll actually probably recognize like 30 people from the Canadian cannabis space. We had a very interesting interview with him. He's from Nova Scotia, and his take on how cannabis is becoming destigmatized and normalized. We had a very interesting challenge as of legalization. We traditionally always included the unregulated market within our advertising base, and they have been represented at least 60% of our advertising base. And we've tried to work with companies that we felt were on the right track, that were moving towards compliance, that were, serving people, patients. We step away from people our group consider more money grubbing or profits over patients. We try to really be real with our coverage of the people. But due to the new advertising restrictions and the hesitancy within the Canadian market, we lost 60-70% of our advertising base after that.
The big difference, I think, between us and a lot of the online magazines is we still put out a printed magazine every single month and have since our inception. We're one of the very few printed magazines and one of the only Canadian printed magazines. Skunk has been bought up. Dope is a US-based company. There's a few quarterlies out there that are event-based that just tried and haven't really made it. We have some contemporaries out there, but we don't have a lot of people who do what we do. I'd like to think anyways. Our digital portion only represents half of what we do. We do between 5,000 and 7,000 combined digital downloads every month. But that's not even the bulk of the people reading the magazine. It's the people who get this issue mailed out to them every month. across Canada, and then they pass it over to their friends. And the printed magazine is a valuable tool. It might be a niche market and it might be outdated, but it's a valuable tool to getting information in rural areas across Canada. I do see a lot of these online magazines that are only reprinting what the LPs are giving them. That bothers me a little bit. I'd like to see more original content, more stories about people, not the corporation and how much money they're making. We really love to tell the stories about the people behind the scenes, the people who are passionate, that believe cannabis has changed their lives for the better, and who are giving back and in service to their community. Those are the stories I like to see told, rather than regurgitating the latest press release. There's nothing interesting or original about that, and that is not going to inform or engage or educate their audience. If anything, it's going to just bamboozle them further. And that's not the kind of cannabis coverage I want to see.
Do you have a clear picture of the kinds of people who read your magazine?
I do. Over 25. We do, I think, 52% women and then 48% men read our magazine. Between 25 and 45 represent probably 50% of our readers. 45 up represent the other half. Our readers are distributed pretty evenly across Canada. Urban areas download more. Rural areas request mail-outs more. We get a lot of professionals. Because of our involvement in the Canadian trade show circuit over the last 5 years, we have a heavy following within the B2B community. We're constantly mining that community for stories and content and new advertisers. So it makes sense that the network we built over the last 5 years has really evolved and grown because of that constant mining for new material for High Canada Magazine, both online and offline. So I'd say a good number of those people represent men and women who work within the cannabis space, who are interested in working within the cannabis space, or just plain interested about cannabis in Canada. We offer a lot of insider information about what's going on behind the scenes with a lot of bigger players as well. You know, we talked to Chuck Rafiki, Hugo Alvarez, Jody Emery, Jamie Shaw, so many big advocates and activists out there. And, you know, a lot of people who aren't involved in the Canadian cannabis space like we are. Or all they're hearing right now is, oh, cannabis is legal. Oh, there's Mark Emery is in the news for misappropriate behavior. And that's the bulk of what they're taking away from it right now. Now, last year I had the opportunity to do a couple trade shows that weren't cannabis-centric, and I really enjoyed them. I really enjoyed having Head Canada go out there and really inform and educate consumers about what cannabis is all about. And let me tell you, they don't know anything. We get so used to working within the Canadian cannabis space where everybody knows what cannabinoids are, what CBD can do, what THC is, what a sativa, how different a sativa is from an indica, from a hybrid. So 90% of consumers have no idea. The most frequent question I get at these non-cannabis specific trade shows is, can CBD get me high? Indica, sativa, oh my God, there's more than one? There is so much education that we still need to do as Canadians.
You're obviously very passionate about the medical side. I just wonder if you have any ideas for how the industry could be doing better.
Our team has been quite critical of the federal government this year in particular about some of the ways they were addressing medical patients' concerns. It bothers me a lot to see the Ontario government subsidizing rec and turning its back on med patients. It disheartens me to see that they've thrown the idea of compassionate pricing away. It saddens our entire team to see that most of these LPs would like to make their money off rec when a lot of them started serving small med patient bases. I hate to see high cost making it cost prohibitive for people who have been using cannabis, whatever way they want to use it. It's not cost effective. So if I'm on a disability and I'm using CBD for my arthritis or my sleeplessness or my anxiety or whatever, and now it's twice as much online to buy it legally, that makes it cost prohibitive for me. If I'm on social assistance and I can barely make ends meet, I'm going to buy my $7 a gram dispensary weed or street level weed because I can't afford the $14 or $15 you're charging me just to get my medication. They're misinformed for the most part about the true nature of medicinal, and it's been a long fight, and there are really good groups out there fighting the good fight, informing and educating on a governmental level. MCRCI is a good one out of British Columbia. Caniscribe here in Ontario does a lot of advocacy as well. When Bill Blair did his big tour around Canada to find out more about cannabis from people who used it, they didn't stop and talk to any of the people we knew. I don't know where they stopped, but wherever they got their education information about how medicinal cannabis is being used, they were missing. informed, or they only saw a small fraction. And as a result, we are seeing the medical patients suffer. Soon we're going to start seeing insurance companies jump on board on a bigger level, starting to reimburse medical patients for the high cost of cannabis. It's unfortunate that we had that big scandal last year with the Veterans Association. There was some sort of scandal involved with how much they were being reimbursing, and they had to cut back and limit how much they were being reimbursed. And to us, that just showed us that there was a real need within the veterans community of Canada to treat things like post-traumatic stress syndrome and injuries sustained during their time in serving their country. We're going to spend the next 10 years tweaking it and making it work. And not everybody is going to be happy, but we're going to, I think as a country and as a group, there are enough voices out there advocating for all the right things that it's hard to ignore. Our medical patients are the harshest critics when it comes to licensed producers. If you look online, it's the med patients who are holding the LPs accountable for moldy weed, high pricing, overpackaging, not doing what they originally said they were going to do. Never before there has been such a high level of accountability. And I think we're going to see that translate into fairer access.
I tell you, I used to work in the federal government. They are very dedicated to the work at hand and making sure that they maintain the commitments that we gave, quote unquote, protect the children or reduce.
I'm all about diversion. I am. You have to be 21 to get on our website. We recommend you're 21. I've read a number of studies on the effects of cannabis on an underdeveloped brain. And I agree, like alcohol, keep this stuff out of the hands of our children. We can't be glamorizing it. We can't be promoting to children. That said, just like alcohol, there is a way to do that. And we are complying in every way we can to make sure that we do not market towards children and that people are aware about effects of cannabis on an undeveloped brain. I have two sons. They're 20 and 26. I was adamant, not that they not try cannabis, that they try cannabis in moderation until they were in 1920. Just like alcohol. I didn't want to see them getting shit-faced drunk every night either. And then when they were 18, 19, we had the big discussions, and I spoke with both my sons. Now, funny that as publisher of High Canada magazine and such a huge advocate of cannabis as a whole, that I would have these concerns, but they're legitimate concerns.
I'm particularly focused on California, and what I'm doing is I'm comparing our branding laws and our advertising laws and maybe even our production grow laws. And I'm thinking that we're not in the best place when it comes to business, but we're in a great place when it comes to consumers.
Those are seeing the American invasion of Canada right now through cannabis, and I'm not enjoying that. Seeing a lot of large companies that have already made their bank in California with their 5,000 medical dispensaries. It's a $1 billion market in some states. And they're taking that money and they're looking at Canada, at this beautiful new market, and they're seeing the opportunities. And they're taking advantage of these opportunities. My worry, we're going to see large grow shops, Scott's, for instance, going to come into Canada and wipe out all the mom and pop homegrown hydroponic shops, like Chapters did with the small bookstore. We're going to seeing the kind of the more rural approach to growing taken away, and it's going to become very Walmarty. And we're going to see this, and that's going to be the United States invasion of Canada. They're throwing a lot of money at the Canadian market right now.
If you have to give out a message to policymakers to think about how to set up the system,
I could launch into a bunch of things I think they should do, that my people think they should do, that I've read online that people think they should do. But ultimately, I'm going to cut them a little bit of slack. I'm happy that we even got this far, that we're even at the point that it's legal and we can now go back to the core systems and change parts of it and tweak it and make it better and make it so that it works for everybody. So instead of being really hypercritical, I'm going to applaud them on how much work they've done so far. And yes, it's a terribly imperfect system. They haven't taken so many things into account, but we still have time. And as Canadian in my particular position, I'm optimistic that these changes will happen and that we will work out the kinks. It could be a hell of a lot worse, and there's a chance we might not have even got to this point. We could have had the monopoly in Ontario. We got the lottery system. It was also an imperfect system. But as imperfect as things are, they are improving monthly. This year, we're going to see a tremendous improvement on the way things are going. They've had to realize that they've done things wrong, and they're really re-examining a lot of the things they've already put into place. And I think we're going to see a lot of things addressed when they make these announcements about edibles and all the new laws coming out in spring. Slow changes, small steps, can't please everybody right out of the gate all the time. I live in Brampton, and this fall I watched one particular candidate campaigning solely on an anti-cannabis platform. So Brampton was covered in like, no weed here. And then I see online forums and discussions talking about why certain cities opted out and then decided to opt back in. It's a lack of education information. Also, wanting a bigger chunk of the pie is a big part of why cities are opting in and out. But instead of focusing on just the negatives, just what it can do to our youth, how it can affect your driving, and the information we're getting on how different provinces are getting ready to sell it, the Canadian government's doing very little to educate its populace about what cannabis can actually do. So consumers are turning to the only source they have for information and education, the internet. And they're learning primarily everything they need to know themselves. And sometimes it's right, it's not always right. If Health Canada decided that they wanted to add a component to their current marketing campaigns that are primarily solely directed at driving and diversion, and use some of that, some of their voice and some of their platform to provide clear and accurate information on what cannabis is, what THC is as opposed to CBD, what the different types of strains are, or what's the difference between sativa and indica, what types of method of consumption may or may not be right for you. We're getting information and education, just not about the things that Canadians are really interested in. We know we shouldn't be driving and smoking. We should also not be behind the wheel of a car when we're on heavy medications or drinking. Canadians know this. We're not that stupid, but they're driving it home right now. They're also driving home the diversion aspect where, we'll keep cannabis away from our youth. Absolutely. But Canadians need to know what the hell cannabis is all about. Don't tell me this is a widget, and this widget is going to be bad for you when you drive and bad for kids, but you're not telling me what the widget is. I'm just have a general idea of what this widget is. They need to be clearer. They need to add a component. They have the capability, they have the voice and the platform. So why not include more information education? That is very specifically what I think they could do.
You focus on women in your articles, and you talk about the community that we're building here.
Well, we talk about every men and women. It just so happens that we have this one particular feature that solely focuses on women. Because when I started this industry, I felt I have 6 sisters. So I grew up in a household that was dripping with estrogen. I am a firm believer in equality across the board. And when I got into the cannabis industry, I saw it was run by men, all men. Every dispensary was owned by a guy. Women were poorly represented in this burgeoning community, but they represented most of the manufacturers. Most of the people creating these products were women. Most of the backbones of these companies were women. And I thought it was important to focus on that. It made me really proud over the years to see the entire switch, and that women have become such a major part. I know out of our team, 8 out of 10 of us are women on our High Canada Magazine core team. And I know countless companies owned and operated by women. And I'm seeing more and more women being appointed to positions of power within the LP and the corporate structure, which is also heartening that they're learning as well. And it's not quite even yet, but every month we highlight not only the triumphs of these women, but some of the adversity and challenges they've had to go through to get to where they are. And these are the questions that really inspire and empower other women to move past these challenges and get involved in the cannabis space, not only for themselves, but for, second income, second career. People are very passionate about the cannabis space when they get involved, and they want to work within it. I would love to see just as many men and just as many women involved in the industry. It shouldn't be like an old boys club. I'm a middle-aged white man. I understand that traditionally this type of media has been run by middle-aged white men. And it's important for me to give a voice to everybody else. It's not just my voice. High Canada is not just Cy Willaims, and it's not just here to feed my ego. It's a group of people who are dedicated and passionate to providing information, education about cannabis. And like I said, 80% of our team are women within the Canadian cannabis space. And that wasn't done on purpose. That's just the way it unfolded.
I was wondering if you can give me a picture of what you could say is different around Canada, maybe even how you're part of that community.
We try our hardest to be a part of all of these different communities through our web of Canada reps. So, for instance, Mellow Moments out of Kingston, she covers Eastern Ontario, southeastern Ontario, which incorporates like Ottawa, Kingston, the Tyendinaga Mohawk territories, Alliston, that particular area. She works in various roles within that community, enabling her kind of a very unique seat at the table watching that particular part of the cannabis space evolve. Now, on the other side of that coin, we have our Toronto reps, Michaela Friedman and Ginny Mora, who they deal with a much more urban beat, and we see more activists and more dispensary culture up until recently. And it's more of a highbrow course, but it's evolved into more of a highbrow corporate business cannabis space here in Toronto. Whereas the dispensary market and the unregulated, the more unregulated brands have all shifted over now to Hamilton, which is the new, has been for at least a year now, the real cannabis capital of Ontario. They had almost 100 dispensaries open there. I think it's probably down to 50. They finally opted in and have started enforcing. But there are like literally hundreds of manufacturers, hundreds of brands that I know of out there, both regulated and unregulated. Now, take that area, those three regions, and then compare them to, say, Montreal, Miss Lynette, our Montreal, our Quebec High Canada rep, Jen Larry from CBD Strategies Group, who's also works with us there, and it's a totally different market that's really struggling to climb out of the black market it's been working with for the last 50 years. There we see a lot more biker involvement, a lot more organized crime. We see tighter restrictions on advertising. It's a totally night and day. Go to Victoria, where it would have been a mecca for edibles and cannabis users. They'll ticket you now for smoking weed in public. And they're very stringent about this. The British Columbia market is divided into all these different areas too. Victoria, the Golden Coast, the Vancouver dispensary market, and then thousands of microprocessors dotted throughout the southern British Columbia mountains, like literally thousands. And British Columbia, they also have to deal with organized crime coming in from the ports. There's the Russian mob, the Yakuza, the Vietnamese. There's all sorts of other types of organized crime that we don't see here in Ontario. Our growers aren't getting tariff or having to pay protection money to anybody either to make sure that their crops aren't destroyed or they're not beat up or robbed. And then there's ripper culture, where people are just waiting for growers to finish their crop and then going in and stealing everything. So we're seeing like more compound effect, where growers are really like they've got the giant fences and the dogs and the guards and I've been blindfolded and helicoptered into a grow in British Columbia, and it was a very unique experience. But the places that I've had the opportunity to visit in British Columbia have really shown me how different that particular culture is from what we have over here in Ontario. There are so many differences. If you look at Alberta, they don't have a dispensary market at all. They have a tightly woven web of delivery systems and services. They also get winter 9 months of the year, so it's a very conservative atmosphere. Move further to the west from Alberta, and you've got the Bible Belt and a very, very conservative approach to cannabis in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Even in Northern Ontario, we think is barely touched by cannabis culture. There are thriving little groups, Thunder Bay, Wawa, North Bay, Sudbury. Our Sudbury Facebook group that we're a part of has twice as many followers as our High Canada Facebook group. Every single area is different, either because of geography or politics or organized crime connection. It's a big deal to pull an entire market out of the black market.
One of the questions I'd definitely like to ask a guest is about their strains they like using.
There's a couple different markets within the Canadian cannabis space. There's the legal cannabis market, where you can go online or go to one of these wonderful little stores and buy your cannabis directly. There's the high-end quad market, quads, diamonds, all the high-end specialty bits and bobs that we see, crystals and dab sauce. We're talking high-end, $600 an ounce cannabis. We've got cheap and cheerful market that has arisen out of the dispensary market and street dealers, the low-end dubs, high trips, maybe if you're lucky. Then there's the concentrate market. Shatter's huge. Shatter has been huge for a long time. Rosin is taking its place because it's easier to produce. It's safer to produce. Not as many people are blowing their hands off. And the Canadian government did come out down pretty hard on shatter manufacturers for C45. Rosin, however, is something people can do at home and press themselves. And then there's the edible market, the topical market. We're not even going to go near the CBD.
For the record, what's the difference between CBD hemp and cannabis?
Okay, so hemp-based CBD has 0% THC. It is purely hemp-based CBD. Research has shown us, and there are so many people out there that have been able to educate us on this, that you need the smallest amount of THC to activate your CBD. Full spectrum is much more popular amongst aficionados and connoisseurs because they know it works. Now, for instance, I have an opportunity to test many different types of CBD tincture. When I have a hemp-based CBD tincture, I need 3 times as much to achieve the desired effect that I would if I were taking a full spectrum CBD with a little THC. But people are all freaked out. Oh, THC, you're going to get me high. No, it's not going to get you high. Most of these full spectrum are coming with a very, like, for instance, Spark of Life. It's a full spectrum. It's a CBD, CBDV, CBG, and THC. Its percentages are very impressive. It's got like 1.67 milligrams of THCV, which activates all the other wonderful parts of this. Here's one that's a hemp-based CBD, and it's also a 500 milligram. It's a CBD formula. But on testing, it took me 3 times more of this to get the tingly feeling of a pure CBD, cannabis-based CBD. So there's misinformation on the market, and then there are countless companies out there. They're already producing hemp-based CBD and distributing it through like jobber networks that supply variety stores across the country. And people are cashing in on this CBD phase. People are buying CBD from a number of sources, and it's really just hemp-based CBD. And the amount they're taking isn't going to be effective. There's nothing wrong with hemp-based CBD. It's good for you, and there are many, many benefits. Just if you're looking for the solid treatment option of a full spectrum CBD, you go right to a full spectrum CBD. You don't muck around with like a diluted version.
Part of the reason for asking about your favorite strain has to do with educating the audience out there to understanding little pieces of it.
Well, I've got a few different ones I'm particularly fond of. When I'm working, I like a strong sativa. I really like Girl Scout cookies because it enhances my memory and it influences my like long-term recall. So I have these great memories of like 30 or 40 years ago. The diesels are great for sex, the sour diesels. I'm trying to relax, a good indica. I really love Remo's Zombie Kush. I always find that to be an uplifting and relaxing strain. It's one of his proprietary strains that I'm very, very fond of. I like Wedding Cake as well. Usually gives me a little bit of a boost. It helps me with long-term planning and that kind of like intricate planning type of thought that I find myself involved in quite often. I love hash. Always helps me shut down at the end of the day. I like dabs. I really enjoy the terpy tastes. I like the heady effects. I love my Shatterizer. I have a whole bunch of different cartridges that I use to try out different things. We try a lot of edibles here. I like edibles. It's easy to green out with edibles. People who are in chronic pain really seem to like the concentrates and the edibles because it allows them to get the maximum dose to address their pain levels. To be honest, I could see them really over the next 10 years really coming down hard on people who still consume cannabis through combustion. There are some inherent dangers behind the edibles. For instance, if you walk into my house, I have 2 adult children. One of them lives with me, he's 20. You look at my fridge, you'll see cherry cheesecake in a jar. You'll see gummies galore. You'll see Rice Krispie squares, and you'll see pieces of cake and brownie and cookies. And like everything that's good in my fridge that looks tasty will get you high. Here's my point, though. Without a locked box in my fridge, how am I supposed to keep that out of the hands of children? If I had grandchildren or if I had little kids, there's nothing in my fridge that could not be consumed that would not wind up putting that kid in the hospital. And we're going to see a lot more, I hate to use the word cannabis overdose because you can't really overdose, you can green out, but kids getting their hands on things that they shouldn't get their hands on because their parents aren't taking accountability for the levels of danger involved as well. So as much as I want to see edibles out there on the market, I also want to see them kept within a safe, locked container within their fridge so that we keep it out of the hands of kids and not cast all the shade on the edibles market. Much like we keep our booze up and our cleaning supplies locked up under the sink and our guns in a locked box to make sure that we accept responsibility of these properly and responsibly.
If you had to give advice to people who are starting in the cannabis space, and I know there are different types of businesses, do you have any advice for people about what to think about?
Be patient when it comes to building your team. Sometimes it takes time for the right people to find you, for you to find them. Things will fall into place. There's a business analogy that I love about group dynamics, and it goes like this: norming, storming, growing. Every group goes through it. Initially, when you get a group together, a positive idea, passionate about this idea, you're pushing this idea forward. You're not pushing any boundaries. You're in the norming phase, and inevitably, the norming phase always leads to storming, where you meet challenges and hit adversity on your path with your team. If you can make it through that storming period, you get to a place called working, where you're actually moving your brand, your idea, your team forward in a positive direction. And every time you add a new component, you reset this, you go back to the beginning. And it's important to remember to take that into account when you're building your team, you're building your brand, you're finding your place within the industry, that it takes time and requires patience. You're not going to hit it right the first time or even the third time. You're going to keep trying to tweak it and make it work. Hi Canada and myself are huge fans of mentoring, mentor-mentee relationships. We've mentored a number of smaller companies over the years. We've had a lot of our Hi Canada reps transition using Hi Canada Magazine as a platform to allow them to grow their experience, reputation, whatever within the industry, and then carry those skills forth into a new career within the cannabis space. And a lot of that has to do with mentor-mentee relationships. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask people who are out there for their opinion, for guidance, because they will offer it. And there are a lot of great companies out there that offers mentor-mentee relationships. You just have to you have to look for them. But they're worth their weight in gold to any entrepreneur, any person trying to get into the cannabis industry. Cannot say enough great things about how much that benefits both the mentors and the mentees. I have a dream to turn Hi Canada Magazine into a media group, into a network. And we've been actively expanding our digital assets over the last couple months in 2018 and all through 2019, expanding our digital assets to incorporate more video, more authentic coverage, more podcasts. I would like to see Hi Canada emerge as a leading cannabis media group in Canada over the next little while. Originally, it was supposed to be a 5-year plan, and it was based around the magazine. But as we've grown into digital and expanded our video content through YouTube and on other platforms, we've really seen a vacuum where we can fill and grow and turn into a Canadian version of High Times, a true Canadian version of High Times. Whether or not I'll always be at the helm is a different story, but I'm certainly going to keep building it until we get to that point. We've teamed up with Terry Roycroft, who is head of MCRCI in British Columbia and also runs the 210 Canada movement. 210canada.com if you're interested. What Terry's done is he's, like all Canadians, he's decided sometime last year that he didn't want to wait for 420. He wanted to blaze in February, halfway. So he started a new Canadian celebration of all things cannabis, which he called the 210. And we were such a fan of what he had started last year, and that was such an amazing turnout, that we teamed up with them this year to further promote 210 as a Canadian cannabis celebration. We are hosting both a large industry mixer in Vancouver on February 10th at the Venue nightclub. And we're also hosting this same party here in Hamilton, Ontario on February 10th at a yet-to-be-disclosed location. Tickets are available for free. We're using it as a platform to raise money in both British Columbia and Ontario for cannabis substitution programs. Now, if you don't know what cannabis substitution programs are, they are programs that are being set up across the country for people who are dealing with opiate addictions and heroin addictions and other hardcore drug addictions, and they're utilizing cannabis as an exit strategy or a substitution strategy to help people wean off some of these more harmful drugs. And their programs are meeting with critical success across the country. There's some really good ones out there, and there's a whole bunch of new ones that are forming. I believe so strongly in these programs. I was in Vancouver last year and toured the High Hopes Project with their cannabis substitution program, for making impactful changes on its West Hastings community. And even recently, there was a cannabis substitution program set up in the East Side. It has almost 300 people line up every weekend to participate. And talking to some of those people, you see that they're not just grabbing the cannabis or the cannabis oils, the concentrates, the edibles for resale to fuel their own addiction. They're actively making changes in their lives using cannabis as an exit strategy. Other than harm reduction programs scattered across the country and methadone programs, I have yet to see anything as successful as the cannabis substitution programs I'm seeing set up across Canada. I'm seeing people being given their lives back, people who the methadone program has failed, people who have slipped through the cracks, who are being offered a chance to get their life back. But we support that movement 100%, more than we can possibly ever support it. I wish that we could do more for them, and I would love to see programs like this set up all over Canada. It's certainly a cause that's near and dear to my heart. So that's February 10th in both Hamilton and Vancouver. After that, we have about 30 giant events happening over the course of 2019, and I'm excited to have as many of them as physically possible.
If they want to reach out to you, or if they want to find out more about High Canada,
on our website, highcanadamagazine.com, or on our digital download site, highcanada.net. They can always, there's a place on the website where they can drop me a note. We get many notes frequently, daily. So you can always reach out to me or to any member of our team through their website. And as always, everything we've ever printed is available for free digital download off our website as well. I would like to take a moment to thank our High Canada Magazine reps across the country. We have Mellow Moments in Kingston, Tammy 905 in Hamilton, Miss Lynette in Montreal, Colin Banbury, Bruce Ryan, Phil Wong, Michaela Friedman, Evangelina Kay, Rainbow Smith, Jeannie Mora, who every month takes care of all of our corrections and changes, and she keeps us on track and makes sure our language is on point. Mary Jane Baker. Thanks to everybody on our team.
Hope you liked the show. Stay tuned for the next one. Looking forward.